Hello everyone, I'm Anastasia. I welcome you all to this new session of Fundamental of Nursing. So in today's session, we are going to deal with a very important topic, that is the enteral nutrition. This enteral nutrition is also known as the total enteral nutrition and is usually provided to those clients who are not able to ingest food by themselves, or to those when the GI tract is impaired or when the transportation of food through the small intestine is interrupted. These enteral feeding can also be administered through the nasogastric, nasoduodenal as well as the nasojejunal feeding tube. Or they can also be administered through the gastrotomy or even through the jejunostomy tube. And for whom is this indicated? This is commonly indicated for clients with cancer. And here when we say cancer, it is mainly the head and neck as well as the upper GI. It is also indicated for clients with critical illness and trauma. It is also indicated for clients with neurological and muscular disorders, which can include the brain neoplasm, the cerebrovascular accident, dementia, myopathy, and even the Parkinson's disease. It is indicated for clients with respiratory failure with prolonged intubation, as well as gastrointestinal disorders such as mild pancreatitis, inflammatory bowel disease, and for those with endocutaneous fistula. And the last indication is for those clients with inadequate oral intake, and this may be because of anorexia nervosa, difficulty in chewing, difficulty in swallowing, or even if the client is under depression, because when one is depressed then he or she will not be willing to eat, and because of this it can lead to an inadequate oral intake. So these are the various indications for enteral nutrition. So for those clients who are under these conditions, then it may be required for us to provide this enteral nutrition to them. Now let's move on to the next, that is the enteral feeding. This enteral feeding refers to the intake of food through the gastrointestinal tract, and here when we talk about the gastrointestinal tract, it involves the mouth, esophagus, stomach, and the intestine. This enteral feeding may mean nutrition which is taken directly through the mouth or even through a tube that goes directly into the stomach or the small intestine. In the medical setting, the term enteral feeding is commonly used as the tube feeding. That means here, when one says that this particular patient is under tube feeding, which means this particular patient is under the enteral feeding. A person on enteral feeds usually has a condition or an injury that will be preventing that person on eating a regular diet by mouth. But here, the GI tract, that is the gastrointestinal tract, will still be able to function. So here there may be some clients where you will encounter that they will not be able to take food through their mouth, as well as their GI tract will not be functioning. So for these type of clients, we will not be providing the enteral feeding. However, if you encounter clients that is not able to have their food through mouth, but their GI tract is still functioning, then only we will be providing this enteral feeding, or also known as the tube feeding. So why do we provide this enteral feeding? Here, whenever a person is being fed through a tube, it will allow them to receive the nutrition which is required by the body, and at the same time it also keeps their GI tract working. So this enteral feeding may make up their entire calorie intake, or it can also be used as a supplement. So here, whenever you are providing this enteral feeding, the type and the frequency of feeding as well as the amount which needs to be administered must be followed as ordered by the primary care provider. A standard formula provides 1 kilocalorie per milliliter of solution with proteins, fats, carbohydrates, minerals, as well as vitamins in specified proportions. This enteral feeding can also be administered to clients through an open or through a closed system. Here in open system, we will be using an open top container or even a syringe for administration, whereas in closed system, it consists of a pre-fill container that is piped with enteral tubing and will be attached to the central access device. So here, whenever you are providing this enteral feeding, it can be provided in an open as well as in a closed system. This enteral feeding can also be given intermittently or continuously. So here, this intermittent feeding are the administration of 300 to 500 ml of the enteral formula several times per day. And here the bolus intermittent feeding will also be followed, that is a feeding that uses a syringe to deliver this formula into the stomach. So here from the name itself you can understand, right? Intermittently, that means not continuously, there will be a gap. So here in this intermittent feeding, that it is given not continuously, there is a gap between each and every feeding. So here what we do is that we will administer 300 to 500 ml of enteric formula several times per day. And here when we are doing this, we can also follow the bolus intermittent feeding, whereby we will be using a syringe in order to deliver this formula into the stomach of the client. Whereas continuous feeding are generally administered over a 24-hour period by using an infusion pump, which is also known as a kangaroo pump, that will guarantee a constant flow rate. So here, depending on the condition of the client, the physician will be ordering you whether you need to provide a continuous or an intermittent feeding. Now let's move on to the next, that is the types of enteral feeding. So here, according to the American College of Gastroenterology, there are presence of 6 main types of feeding tubes, and these 6 tubes can also have their further subtypes depending on exactly where they end in the stomach or the intestine. So here the placement of the tube will be chosen by the doctor based on what size tube is needed, how long the enteral feeding will be required, as well as by their digestive ability. He will also be the one to choose the enteral formula which needs to be used based on the tube placement, on the digestive ability, as well as on the nutritional needs of that particular client. So here, the tube which needs to be used, what size it is, and the formula which needs to be given will be decided by the medical professional himself. So as I've said, that according to the American School of Gastroenterology, there are 6 types of feeding tubes. So here, the first one is the nasogastric tube. So this tube will start in the nose and will also end in the stomach. The second is the orogastric tube, which starts in the mouth and end in the stomach. And the third one is the nasoenteric tube. So this is a tube which will start from the nose and end in the intestine. And this is also of 2 types, that is the nasojejunal and the nasoduodenal. So here when the tube needs to start from the nose and end in the jejunum, then we will be using the nasojejunal tube. And if the tube needs to start from the nose and end in the duodenum, then we will be using the nasoduodenal tube. The fourth one is the oroenteric tube, which will start from the mouth and also end in the intestine. The fifth one is the gastrotomy tube. So this tube is placed through the skin of the abdomen straight to the stomach. Percutaneous endoscopic gastrotomy, and PRG, which stands for percutaneous radiologic gastrotomy. And the last one is the jejunostomy tube. So this is a tube which will be placed through the skin of the abdomen straight into the intestine. This also includes of 2 subtypes, that is the PEJ and the PRJ, where PEJ stands for percutaneous endoscopic jejunostomy and PRJ stands for percutaneous radiologic jejunostomy. So till now we have discussed what do we mean by enteral nutrition, what is enteral feeding, what are the various points we need to keep in mind when we are providing this enteral feeding, as well as the types of enteral feeding, right? Now we will be discussing about the possible complications of enteral feeding. So here there are some complications that can occur as a result of enteral feeding. And some of the most common one includes the aspiration, which means the food going to the lungs. So here when you are providing this enteral feeding, then aspiration may be one of the complication, whereby the food, instead of going into the intestine, it may go to the lungs of the client. The next is the refeeding syndrome, where dangerous electrolyte imbalance may occur in people who are very malnourished and starts receiving the enteral feed. There may also be an infection on the insertion side of the tube. Nausea and vomiting may also result from feet that are too large or fast, or even from the slow emptying of the stomach. The client may also experience skin irritation around the tube insertion site. Diarrhea can also occur because of the liquid diet which we are providing to the client. And there can even be a tube dislodgement or a tube blockage if the tube is not flushed properly. So these are the various complications that can occur because of the enteral feeding. So now here we have come to the end of this session, whereby in today's session we have discussed about the enteral nutrition, the enteral feeding, the points to be kept in mind whenever we are providing tube feeding to the client, as well as we have also discussed about the types and the possible complications of this enteral feeding. So I hope you have got a clear understanding of this topic. I will be meeting you in another session. Until then, have a good day. Thank you.